So let's look at these pieces now then in more detail. So to really get started, as we went through those key elements in a from bottom up approach, meaning that we need to look at the foundational pieces and then how different pieces sit on top of that, and then also finally making sure that we also look at the sustainability aspect. But as said, to be looked at, developed in parallel, but for the visualization, the foundational aspect is really getting the governance piece initiated to begin with. So when we look at the governance, the need for the governance, what we have done so far is very much globally validated. That first of all, in many ecosystems, they may be feeling that the challenges that you have in your ecosystem or your ecosystem development, that those are locally unique, but a majority of the activities in ecosystem development are in fact globally shared. So very much similar problems in all of the ecosystems development, where some of the key things are that all the ecosystems are really struggling with this fragmentation of ecosystem information and connectivity problems of making that information flow and available for all of the ecosystem actors collectively. So in practice, that means that it's really hard in the ecosystem perspective to really know what is going on in regards to new companies and innovations happening in your key markets or key industry verticals and so forth. Who are the different key actors and in organization level, the actual individual level, key people, key organizations, their roles, their backgrounds, their motivators, and so forth. What is relevant for your business? So if you are looking to operate an accelerator model, what are the key actors that are relevant for your business? Or if you are the entrepreneur building a venture, what services in general are relevant for you? Who are doing what and why? So what, like many support organizations and organizations in general, part of the ecosystem, they may have a very broad offering of things that they do, but in reality, in their website, for example, but in reality, 80% of their effort goes to some specific, more focused activities, and that is their primary activities. And in addition, the kind of the external information may include outdated or project-based things that are not going to be relevant, going forward. Where and when are things happening? So from timing aspect, when are things going to be available in regards to your own startup development phases? Are they available now? Are they available 6 months from now? Where do I need to go to get that support? And then really anyone entering that ecosystem as a new entrepreneur or as a new service function or as a new organization or international company, international talent, international investors, is how do we connect to it all most effectively, and so forth. So this is really just the tiny tip of the iceberg of the information disconnectivity due to fragmentation of the ecosystem information. And when we look at the two kind of the key aspect of the ecosystem development we have, the sustainability and long-term perspective that we need to look after. And on the other hand, we have the quick and short-term tests and new elements and learnings that we need to apply. And we have this top-down thinking and top-down actors and activities, and we have the bottom-up energetic, short-term, quick bottom-up actors that are both have different dynamics when they look at ecosystem development, but both are equally important because of the different dynamics that they bring into the table. But the main challenge with that is that when we think of the whole ecosystem concept, by definition, it's not owned by anyone. It's not really to be considered being controlled by anyone. Therefore, it also means that when we look at the freedom and the responsibility, they work hand in hand. So if it's not someone whose responsibility it is, who is the owner of the ecosystem, it also means that there is nobody whose responsibility it in fact is to make it work. So what that leads to is it's a collective multi-stakeholder responsibility, but as we can all understand, that doesn't work like that. So in practice, there needs to be someone who takes some of the functions in the ecosystem and starts looking after the everyone's shared interest towards where they are heading with the ecosystem development overall. So the question really is that who should be that organization, or how to structure this responsibility for the benefit of everyone to get to the right direction. So this gets to the terminology that lives around the ecosystem in a different way. So instead of thinking of controlling or managing the ecosystem or owning it or even driving it, it's more of the orchestration aspect. So really to look at like that bus driver, they are there basically making sure that everyone gets where they need to go. Their main role is to keep everyone safe, and the people in the bus can, spend time on their mobile phones and, chat with their family or do whatever they need to do, and feel comfortable that they are getting where it was agreed to be get. But at the same time, the driver is there to drive on behalf of the agreed destination and so forth. So really just looking after that the collectively decided things are actually happening. So the orchestration is a neutral role, not a controlling role. So the other terminology to help is like a moderator in a panel session in an event is a very neutral role to drive the conversation and making sure that the panel is a good one for the audience. A coordinator who is not so much doing the actual activities, but actually coordinating that the activities happen in a logical sense. Secretarial functions, taking notes, keeping information, communicating that information back to others, information management, communication, and so forth. So looking from the lens of ecosystem orchestration is the beginning part of then starting to look at how does a governance model would look like around this type of mindset. And also looking at for what that is applied to, this is from the perspective of looking at the different types of organizations, having the support organizations, having big companies, research organization, higher education, service providers, funding organizations. And if we think of the information flow and keeping everyone informed between this, it is very difficult for these organizations themselves to keep all the other organizations informed, because they themselves also represent a key function in the ecosystem itself. So this becomes really a perspective question when we look at from the perspective of those who operate activities in the ecosystem versus the perspective that we're looking through this picture, is how that function of an orchestration gets into the picture. So some of the numbers indicated here: 6 applications, 15 two-way connections, 5 per each application. So this is like whether it's an organization or more deeply the applications in those organizations, how to build the information sharing. The more there's organizations that need to think of it from their own perspective, the more complex it gets, the better the ecosystem develops. The more actors there are, the more activities there are, the more complex it gets to stay informed just between one-to-one relationship management. So when we scale that up, once we are successful in the ecosystem development, when we get more of the organizations and actors on board saying, yes, we want to join this effort, yes, we want to collaborate, the more there are organizations, and in technical level, the more there are applications to think of sharing information, the more and more challenging this picture gets. But at the same time, when we look at that, what is actually why these organizations are part of the ecosystems, why are they counted part of the startup ecosystem mapping exercise? When we look at what organizations are relevant, what organizations or services belong to the ecosystem, the key thing that is to understand is that they all share information from same elements that they're working with. So whether those are ideas growing into businesses, ideas growing into companies through interaction of multiple services, whether those are entrepreneurs navigating of different support services from ideation workshops, startup weekends, to incubators, to accelerators, to through tens or hundreds of different event participations, workshops to help develop the companies and their teams into organizations. Those are all same information and part of multiple different organizations, support functions, and applications, so CRMs, event systems, and so forth. And when we look at this, solving this puzzle, this problem, we need to start looking at the connection method. We need to start looking at access rights to that data. We need to start looking at information around how can we build independently connectivity to your organization or your information? How will you document that information for others? What data, what information is there actually to be shared about the ideas, about entrepreneurs, about mentors, about investors, about events? What are the data models? So in what structure does the information exist in service A, service B, organization C, and so forth? And who should have the ownership of this data? And how does that data ownership should be considered? So these are all key aspects of thinking of why there needs to be someone that starts to look at this from the governance perspective of starting to solve these problems. And for any ecosystem, before there is someone who starts to look at things from this perspective, this problem never gets solved. It is basically impossible problem to solve without building some model that has logical chance of being able to solve it. So a governance model that looks the whole ecosystem orchestration instead of only their own activities in context of the ecosystem. So this brings us to the concept of ecosystem operators, and the ecosystem operators are the ones who should start looking this from the operative perspective. So someone who actually looks this from doing activities in this context as their primary function. So that's the terminology. In addition to ecosystem orchestration, the operator is the one who just looks at making the system work and solving those problems that are forbidding or preventing this type of development to happen from happening. So the ecosystem operator's role sits in between the bottom-up activities and top-down activities. So the key is that they don't represent either party, they don't represent either key activity, they don't represent the government, they don't represent the funding organization, they don't represent the entrepreneurs, they don't represent the accelerators, they don't represent the big companies, they don't represent any of those specifically, but they represent all of them collectively. And that is then the next phase to think of that forward, of how should then the ecosystem operator be structured and how the ecosystem operator should be governed, and where does it get its mandate to become the operator for the ecosystem. And the key factor here also for the ecosystem operator is that is the most important actor to get into a sustainable long-term ability to continuously be there for the ecosystem. So the ecosystem operator's core areas are to focus on the key elements from holistic and neutral ecosystem perspective. So these are the types of things as in Europe, definitely GDPR, how does that apply at ecosystem level? That connects into users' data and user account information in CRM system, event systems, and so forth. Related application programming interfaces between connecting those user accounts or having ecosystem level user accounts to connect different systems. Data and key performance indicators that are ecosystem level, that are logically connected in different levels for the ultimate output targets of the ecosystem, all the way to individual support function KPIs contributing for those output measures. Service functions-based data, so measuring the service processes, the effectiveness of a support function, again being that mentoring, advisory, accelerator program, or even individual workshop around increasing topical knowledge of actors and so forth. Developing the overall user experience at ecosystem level. So instead of looking again individual support function or individual event or individual location that is responsibility of that specific actor, instead looking at that overall user experience from any ecosystem actor's perspective, but in the lens of how do they assess, how do they interact, and how do they understand and visualize that invisible infrastructure that the ecosystem is. How does it make sense to them, and how the user experience can be improved in them navigating through the ecosystem. And then support local business growth via local connected applications and business model development. So really looking at how to improve the information flow and develop and measure or develop through measuring the different activities and finding a business models to sustain their own operations as well. that leads to maintaining the sustainability of overall strategy, processes, and resources, funding, knowledge base, and related shorter and longer processes. So really to be able to carry on the knowledge of the ecosystem across generations and decades, because if all of that knowledge is only attached to individual experts or individual support organizations, it's not neutral enough, it's not holistic enough. If it's only attached to government side, that is very much under political cycles where this level of activities don't carry, unfortunately, such level of importance like many other topics, that they are in risk of total knowledge being vaporized from the ecosystem and many activities to be restarted again after the priority comes into play with the new government. So there's a lot of different aspects for ecosystem operator, but these are really the core areas. And when we look at this from the kind of from key segments, we have the ecosystem framework to help to think about. We have the digital connectivity as one key aspect. We have the metrics and the measurability and data flow as one of the key aspects. And then one more is to really protect the access to data, specifically protect users, individuals, users' data rights when we look at building data sharing ability for the ecosystem level. So to look at how to structure the ecosystem operator, we need to first look at the structure from another perspective. And this is what we call ecosystem forum. An ecosystem forum is more open, it's that inclusive structure that doesn't really, it's not operated in that sense like the ecosystem operator. So ecosystem operators' responsibility and role and mandate should be to really look at the ecosystem development from operational progress perspective, whereas ecosystem forum perspective is the whole process and structure and alignment around bringing all the ecosystem actors together to understand the ecosystem, to understand the current developments in the ecosystem, to divide and communicate about the priorities and the types of development areas that need to be developed, looking at ecosystem development initiative, making decisions, making ideations around what should be done and when and by whom, and finding solutions to those. And that should be more of an event format, something like having an ecosystem forum to come together at least quarterly, maybe once a month, depending on the ecosystem size and level of progress or activities, and to really have a structured agenda and format on how to go through the different development initiatives, how to introduce new ones, how to prioritize the existing ones, how to track the progress of the existing ones, how to share resources or find new resources to make progress on the priority ones, and really be responsible of looking at the initiatives being developed. So this can be divided in the specific topic teams, and it can be divided on specific task forces that takes on those topics, and there's overlapping or cross-cutting themes like regulation or KPIs that apply to any topic, and so forth. And out of this work and out of these outputs of the ecosystem forum efforts is the need that there needs to be someone who's driving those forward and who is keeping measures and who is practically working to make sure that these activities are moving forward, regardless that they are not responsible of moving all of those topics forward themselves, but they are responsible of keeping track that progress is being made, or what progress is being made, and reporting that back to everyone, and making sure that this knowledge or this progress doesn't disappear just because a task force stopped working on it, or a topic team just vaporized because of people involved didn't anymore have momentum of that. Because that's the nature of the multi-stakeholder collaboration on its own, without having the governance structures or proper structures on top of that, or in addition to that. So when we complete this picture, we need to introduce, in addition to the forum that is the driving force of the communication activities, how new initiatives can be activated, how they can be prioritized, how their progress can be measured, how the resourcing can be shared between multiple actors, and so forth. The ecosystem operator comes into the picture to look at how to properly maintain that information visible to everyone, how to be a contact point to introduce the right people to right topics when new things come into play, but do that in a neutral aspect of just making sure that whatever the ecosystem forum puts on the plate keeps moving forward. And then, in addition, to look at these cross-cutting themes at the whole ecosystem level that were covered on the ecosystem operator's core functions, the KPIs, the digital aspect, the data ownership rights, and so forth. So the whole digital aspect of the entire ecosystem, connectivity and data sharing, is one of the biggest key responsibilities for the ecosystem operator to take responsibility as a neutral actor, or otherwise it is not realistically to expect that that type of solutions can be taken care by just bottom-up activity. So looking at the sustainability of the digital development, looking at the sustainability of information and knowledge share over time, and developing tools and services, and growing the number of participants, connections, matching, rules and standards, and so forth, that are all raised from the bottom-up approach, inclusive approach, but then concluded by the ecosystem actors together. And then based on that, the ecosystem operator takes the responsibility to push that forward, together with whatever resources, additional resources, would be available by any of the ecosystem actors, whether that's knowledge, whether that's finance, and so forth. And then last but not least, this ecosystem operator entity should be structured wisely, so that it has a public and private representation of the cornerstone organization, typically the government, some of the universities, those that are extremely sustainable over time and have a significant role to contribute and look after the society or the local economy, from introducing talent, making sure that there's knowledge, needed knowledge introduced in the talent, and that there are proper responsibility to look after sustainability of the ecosystem operator entity, but also private side, bigger companies, maybe banks, these types of actors who have a significant and long-term perspective into the ecosystem, both from the perspective of how they can contribute for that, and also how does it benefit their business and operation in form of better knowledge, better information, better decisions, faster decisions in their own operations, and so forth. And then the last piece is how to design the board of the actual governance then at the ultimate level. So if the ecosystem operator is a foundation, or if it's a private company structure but owned by government and key stakeholders, or whatever or maybe it's an association, it doesn't matter, whatever is the most fitting into local jurisdiction and local setting, but it should have either official board, or in minimum, the official board should be, of course, the key stakeholders that provide the biggest resources, but even the board should operate under mandate of the advisory board, and the advisory board should be structured from key actors of the key ecosystem functions, representing entrepreneurs, representing accelerators, representing investors, representing event organizers, and so forth and so forth, so that there is a representation of the best knowledge of the ecosystem key activities also on top of the ecosystem operator activity. So this way the operator really becomes the middle actor, the neutral middle actor for the ecosystem, only looking to make sure that all of the ecosystem actors are actually getting to the same shared destination. So there is a structure to put in place to really look at how the governance should be organized in the local ecosystem setting. And unfortunately, or fortunately, many ecosystems have a lot of these pieces they do have in place, some of the activities, but the picture is not complete. And the most needed actor, or the biggest missing component typically, is that there is no ecosystem operator who only looks at the ecosystem operator as a neutral actor to push that forward. So when we look at the ecosystem operator's role, what's locally important is to really have a clear mandate, roles and responsibility in ecosystem orchestration at different functions and levels. So that mandate and those roles and responsibilities should be defined by the ecosystem operator's advisory board, represented by the ecosystem actors, as well as open development, open conversations and conclusions from the ecosystem forum. It should have a clearly defined vision, mission, and roadmap with strategy and plans, again, created in a process through an ecosystem forum and the advisory board and the official board of the ecosystem operator. It should focus on being a neutral actor with a capable team governed by the key ecosystem actors. So the neutrality is a key, ecosystem as their primary responsibility is a key, capable team, meaning that there needs to be good capacity in the ecosystem understanding about innovation, entrepreneurship, and startups, understanding about the ecosystem development, but most importantly also strong capabilities around digital transformation, software applications, and digital economy overall. All those combined in the same shared, small enough capable, effective team. To be able to also focus on information management from ecosystem actors and support services. So basically keeping that always up-to-date mapping of all the actors, organizations and services in digital format, development initiatives. What are the development initiatives? What are their priorities? What are their current status? What is holding them back? What progress there has been made? How they are being measured? What are those measures indicating? And then overall statistics and outcomes. So not only measuring the development initiatives, but also measuring the statistics and outcomes perspective of the ecosystem as a whole, and then in different development phases and in development and specific types of services, like all of the accelerators, their outputs, best performing accelerators, all of the incubators, their outputs, best performing incubators, best return of investments, on the same measures that are collectively agreed, shared, and used. And then finally, to make all that happen is to systematically, on ongoing basis, focus on connectivity and data flow, data portability and sharing models. So really making the connectivity happen at application level in practice, and doing that starting from step by step, from simple connectivity to increase more based on the priorities set by the ecosystem forum actors. Making sure that the KPIs make sense at ecosystem level between actors, as well as logically connecting to the outcome, to the overall KPIs for the whole ecosystem, which of course is to make sure that there's a growing number of good growing companies coming out of the ecosystem, and on the other end that there's new talent and ideas increasingly joining the ecosystem. And then looking all the time of developing the sustainable resourcing, meaning that there is right people that can sustain their positions to a longer development at the most important core activities needed for the ecosystem development. And this doesn't start by thinking, okay, where do we get new resources? It starts by looking at what resources we are currently working on and how we can pool those resources together, find shareable things where we don't have to reinvent the wheel and build same things by different actors over and over again, but instead pool those resources, work on shared things, and at the same time free resources for the types of activities to start sustaining the types of activities that are new, because there are savings that can be got from existing ones, and those savings can be moved to start looking at the types of things that bring additional resources or freeze resources to do new things that are not being able to done because nobody is looking at that collective and effective resource pooling. And then together with other operators globally, so now when you can visualize ecosystems having operators in each of the ecosystems, and their focus is their own ecosystem and the key activities there, then what they can do together between other operators is to look at the connectivity for all ecosystem levels and functions, so looking at more global standards, global open standards, and pooling of resources across multiple ecosystems, so whether they are neighboring cities or whether they are cities in the same country, or whether they are two twin cities or friend cities between different countries, to look at, okay, what are the activities where we can pool resources, do that together and implement in both of our ecosystems. It is to share best practices and applications and solutions, KPIs, whatnot, from one ecosystem to another, and also to look at what best practices and software or KPIs or whatnot can be imported from other ecosystems to ours. And to make that all happen is also to look at the standards that can be collectively developed around the compatibility of moving these best practices on applications or KPIs across ecosystems, and key piece when it comes to information and data and standards. One of the key pieces is data models, which is basically the structure of what data exists in our ecosystem in different functions, and how can we make that compatible with other ecosystems so we can send and we can write and read information between the ecosystem functions within and between ecosystems. APIs, so that's application programming interfaces, those are the actual connectivity between aggregated information from our ecosystem to connect to other ecosystems. What are the interfaces, how we can share this type of information across ecosystem? For example, measuring accelerator support function cross ecosystems or any other function. So these are two working together again with other ecosystems. Building shared documentation. So documentation and data models are two of the kind of very key pieces where everyone has to create those to make things work. If we choose to do same or similar, we can work with same data models and we can work therefore with same documentation, and therefore we can work with shared resourcing and shared efforts. That again frees resources to do more on our local activities, where we don't have to reinvent and create everything in our own ecosystem just because we choose not to build compatibility and open standard based models with others. So creating standards is a key piece of that. The responsibility of creating standards for your own ecosystem and operation models doesn't stop there, because the next silo would be your own ecosystem. So to collaborate with others to really develop open standards with other operators globally, the more there are standards, the more connectivity and comparability and data sharing there can be. And we can all imagine the world without standards, and it's actually a great video in YouTube that you can search by world without standards, and you'll get some funny things there that may make you laugh when you look at those, but doesn't necessarily make you laugh when you think of your ecosystem development efforts and realizing that there's a big lack of effort even around building open standards for this development. And then because building the sustainability and better business models also for ecosystem operators to sustain developing models for data monetization is a big piece. Data is extremely valuable. The better the data is, the bit more compatible it is, the more structured it is, the more available it is, the more real-time it is, the more historical data it includes, and so forth, the more valuable the data is. And there can be many different ways to build monetization for big multinational companies, for research data, innovation data, for public sector, for policy making, for many different aspects where that data, even at its simplest statistical format, let alone more informative data, it's extremely valuable and as such a monetization opportunity to sustain the operations of actually being to collecting that while even using it for own ecosystem anyway. So these are all the types of things, and of course learnings, collective learnings and more. These are all types of things to really look at how to collaborate and work together with other operators globally. So really, the ecosystem operators' key focus and role is to be effective, sustainable, and systematic development and orchestration with long-term perspective as a neutral actor for the ecosystem. And then the other core function and foundational piece is to look at the digital and data, the software, the APIs, data economy-driven, real-time, globally competitive, and connected digital single market. So really developing that aspect of it. And a big point of looking at this from the aspect of if there is no local ecosystem operator, doesn't mean that these things don't happen. They do happen, and everything is always happening anyway, specifically in the global digital landscape. It just means that the value of those digital tools and data typically goes somewhere else than the local own economy and ecosystem. So by creating focus around own ecosystem and capturing the benefits in the own ecosystem development needs and all the other monetization needs, and making that data still available, but not for free, not by just because that's how it happens now, being uninformed and also losing value without even measuring it as a lost value in economic development is the problem that each of the ecosystems are pushing forward in their own economic development if they don't start looking at these aspects from how do we do this for ourselves, for us, for ourselves, by ourselves, but in a way where we are part of the global economy in a digital sense, in a smart way. So it really is about designing it to have best of both worlds. So to make things sustainable, those who take care of others need to be equipped properly and taken care as well. So this means that not only the ecosystem operators, which is the entity form key structure to get in place for long-term sustainable development of the ecosystem development, and then operate it with the mandate of ecosystem forum structure. It's also the individuals who work on ecosystem builder as ecosystem builders and ecosystem developers. It is important that there are structures to make these development roles sustainable. Until they are made sustainable, the randomness and the fragmentation and sometimes even several years setbacks with missing or disappearing knowledge and information or political cycles will keep repeating in every single economy repeatedly. So there is ways to get there. There is models and structures to get there, but it is a collective effort to actually get there. So the ecosystem operator is accountable for entrepreneurship and ecosystem development, but it needs to sustain political and economic cycles. So that's why the structure needs to be created so that it has a strong and broad and wide mandate but that it has also sustainable resources to perform its responsibility as a neutral actor for the ecosystem. So one of the aspects to when we look at the entity structure is that some of these are like fundamental principles that we are discussing here. Is some of those can be hard coded, and this depends on like how the different models in different countries are. The foundations typically are such that there can be these foundational principles can be really hard coded into the entity when it's established, or then the more modern things is like blockchain smart contracts. So there are structures to make it so that nobody can hijack the operator when it becomes extremely valuable, or that its mandate doesn't change to just cater for certain types of companies or big companies or so forth. But there's much more around that. So just wanting to highlight this point that there are ways of getting structures in place that can sustain time, that and some of the well-known global actors that are very much operating on one hand with these types of principles is like Kaufman Foundation in US for entrepreneurship, set up by a rich entrepreneur decades ago, who hard-coded the principles and gave the funding for the foundation of how it should operate and how it should not operate. And of course, there's a lot of wisdom in that model, but of course, over time, some of those hard-coded principles can be limiting, but nevertheless, it can sustain time in those structures. And here also an example of financially sustainable foundation model can be that there's initial capital that is given by the founding members, which is whatever the funding is, that the funding itself is actually not used to do any of the operations, but it's only invested into global markets, and only the returns of investment can be used for operational expenditure to keep the structure sustainable pretty much forever, if it's structured with right levels of capital and the cost structure has a buffer to sustain non-profitable years of that model. And in addition, it's then supported with sponsorship funding and other revenue sources, for example, monetizing data and so forth. So all of these models exist, it's just getting there and starting to put these in place and having enough rationale and justification and facts around, or combined experience around, to understand the significance and the need of this, putting these governance models in place. So again, at ecosystem level, moderator, orchestrator, coordinator, secretarial functions, information management, communication, and so forth. That is a neutral actor key positioning to enabling data flow, collection, connectivity, distribution, protection, and creating monetization opportunities. So data is really the key essence of reducing that fragmentation and to be data driven in the development activities and so forth. So really taking this as the primary responsibility at ecosystem level. So the digital economic development of city, region, or country must be managed by knowledgeable and capable people under clear mandate. And if not, then it is unfortunately slips easily under control of foreign governments or freely monopolized by private businesses. So of course we already know, and there's big examples of how this is happening the ever accelerating and on one hand complex digital world, but at the same time that same development creates the vast opportunities for new businesses and economies and jobs to be created, as well as works as the R&D department to solve all of the various wicked problems that the world is facing. So, but we have to find a logical model and have that in place in all of our own ecosystems. So yes, another simplified structure to really look at that ecosystem operator's role above. So we have the ecosystem forum kind of around or below, but then the ecosystem operator focus on support, digital and connectivity, information management and communication, and then having the governance board with these advisory groups that can represent, one group can represent like the startup entrepreneurs in general, group can address, the educational organizations, one group can represent the investors and so forth, and then there needs to be the founding financiers by the biggest and the longest history key organizations from public and private side, mainly the government, university, governments, local, state, national, the universities, and the big companies, including local and even including multinational ones, with their significant presence in the local ecosystems in a smart way. So here's a budgeting example for just to kind of give some ideas of structuring a revenue source or having what type of personnel there should be in place as the expertise for that sustainable operations, and then what type of fees they could be collected, for example, from data monetization or providing the information or providing the support functions and so forth. And this is just a very simplified model, but the point is to indicate that that there is a model and there should be a financial model that should be looked at and should be played around to find a comfortable level. And then whatever this model is, there can be separate subsidies, there can be separate project funding, there can be separate initial capitals, there can be various different aspects, but it helps to start putting it down, breaking it down, and looking at those numbers in a realistic lens and seeing that how would that actually look like? How would our ecosystem operator's budget look like? How would the resources look like? What benefits it could create? What would be the willingness of someone to pay directly? Or what would be the value if someone pays indirectly, if government provides subsidies so entrepreneurs don't pay directly, or maybe startups pay at some point when they acquire real benefits out of it and so forth. But this is just a simplified model to get that thought process going. So next, looking at the culture aspect. So we've talked about the fundamental things, the principles, the only things that can be understood, can be developed. And to build that understanding, it requires knowledge. It requires knowledge like what we are providing here. It requires knowledge that is coming from the data and information being collected. It comes from the silent knowledge that needs to be made tangible and visible by those who have accumulated it over time, and so forth. That's how the understanding is built. And with that understanding, it's more knowledgeable development of what do we actually want to change and improve. Understanding about the startups understanding really what makes innovation entrepreneurship work. How does it actually work in practice, building something out of nothing? How does it actually work to take an idea and push that into a significant company, and making that knowledge available in an effective, scalable way, and making that available for everyone who are taking part, or at least those who are making decisions impacting the ecosystem activities for others. So here we have the key piece of the framework. So building things around the startup model and the startup development phases model, and applying that framework into not only the how to build startups, startup development, which we have a separate Growth Academy curriculum and a certification model to train trainers that train other trainers, and to combine that with licensable, scalable digital knowledge combined with knowledgeable trainers who can train the same content. And underneath that, we have the whole curriculum is under Creative Commons, so the curriculum itself is really available as well as an independent component. But it requires that type of cultural collective recognition to make sure that all of the key knowledge, not meaning the knowledge what we have, but knowledge what we have indexed and put a framework around and put the rationale and logic around, is really made available effectively and scalably to everyone, from policy making to investors to mentors to entrepreneurs to talent, so that they can speak the same language. That is the beginning part, to be able to build, data models, open standard data models around what is a startup. So it is each of the pieces of building that culture. So having really a learning resources that are effective, affordable for everyone who needs those. A 24/7, 365 e-learning service contributing to increase the base volume of innovation, entrepreneurship mindset, measuring future potential. But also same applies for ecosystem developers, policymakers, not only to understand about ecosystem development, but to understand why the ecosystem development, how does it connect with actual innovation building through startups. So here's the summary of the curriculum, the Growth Academy for Innovation Entrepreneurship is through these modules, and the module 1 covers the overall, like a snapshot summary of the whole journey from the eyes of investable, investment-ready companies, regardless of whether they take investment or not, but how does it look from the eyes of the investor and from the ecosystem actors' perspective. We have module 1B, which is basically looking at from the support function perspective, specifically that journey, and from ecosystem development perspective. A small snapshot of that as one module in that curriculum, just a few hours, whereas similarly here we have just a small snapshot of this curriculum on the ecosystem development academy side. Then we have module 2 that focuses on the formation phase. We have module 3 that focuses on validation phase, and module 4 that focuses on scaling phase of innovation entrepreneurship, building new scaling companies and startups from the ecosystems. So it's a model that can be injected into academic side or contributing to educate and empower the current and future generation of ecosystem builders, developers, and operators, along with any individuals and entities who focus on economic development via entrepreneurship, innovation, for new job creation and attracting investments. So it's to understand the journey that the entrepreneurs go through, or the startups go through, or the talent to co-founders to growing organizations go through, and then to understand the ecosystem development around it. And in addition to make available an open digital library of the local ecosystem knowledge and combined with whatever all other key knowledge that is needed by, regardless of different roles of the ecosystem actors, and really look at how to combine the knowledge library development with the ecosystem forum process or flow, that it's not something that is a stale knowledge library, but it's a dynamic, also to be improved with new findings that are based on actual validations through the actual measurements and KPIs. So it really, when there is no barriers to access knowledge itself, when there is no proprietary structures that are overly limiting of making that knowledge available, it pushes everyone to go one step further and start looking at, well, what is then the areas where we can build additional value, because the value that already exists is made accessible to everyone. So this is also, of course, what we practice by us making and us making such education available. We help to create this common language and potential for the ecosystem actors to better collaborate with each other, and even more so to be establishing those ecosystem operators, getting the ecosystem operating and orchestration functions cleared, and then helping to connect those ecosystem operators with each other to develop the global aspect of opportunities for all of those growing companies that grow out from the different ecosystems, enter the global markets to build connections and land in different ecosystems to build their business there, collaborate with local ecosystems and so forth.